We've all got examples of these stories where people go off track by following a GPS, for example, because they've forgotten how to navigate a car or read a map or think about where they're going. They just blindly follow the instructions that the computer's giving them. Well, we're going to have computers telling us to do many more things in the future, and blindly following those instructions is going to be pretty dangerous and pretty hazardous for us all, I'm sure.
Hello, welcome back to Wotter Future. Slightly different location here today, as you can tell. But last time out, we had Neil Tucson. Neil and I had a good conversation about teams and how important they are. I'm sure we've all worked in a team where we thought, gosh, if only we were all rowing in the same direction. So do go and check out that podcast if you want to learn more about that. But today we have Stuart George. Stuart is the previous CEO of Cambridge Audio, and he's now a business advisor and part-time commercial director, helping companies achieve their goals. But more than that, Stuart's a champion of human-centered businesses, which I'm sure we will get into in this conversation. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Fraser. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Having listened to a few of your podcasts in the past, they go in lots of different directions, so excited to see where we go.
I wonder where this one will be. Well, let's jump straight into it and find out. So the first question, as per usual, what is the biggest issue affecting the world of work right now?
Yeah, so I think you kind of alluded to that in the intro a little bit there, talking about me in the sense that being passionate about human-centered business. I think that actually culture and a sense of purpose, which can deliver fulfillment to employees, is such a big issue at this moment in time. I think many businesses have adopted this idea of culture and values and recognize the importance of it. It would seem that many businesses have very similar values at this moment in time, which is not necessarily a problem. But I think there's a need for things to be a little bit more authentic and realistic and perhaps sincere and maybe even, God forbid, honest and truthful about all of this. So the idea of purpose, I think, is incredibly important in all of our lives. It gives us our work gives us a great sense of our identity. If we think about our interactions with people, it's so often an early question on meeting somebody that you ask, what is it that you do? And we're very much talking about it from a work professional perspective. So I think it is of such great importance to us. And yet many people have jobs that they don't necessarily enjoy. And to some extent, that some people have got to do jobs that perhaps most of us would not wish to be doing. But I think that sense of purpose is really important in our lives. And even if we work for a business that's doing something that may not be particularly glamorous or exciting, I think there are ways in which you can be proud of the work that that business does, of the way that the business behaves, what it does for the world beyond its own doors. And therefore, I think having that sense of purpose and being true to it, and really that can be greatly motivating to the people that work within the business. And that of itself obviously delivers great rewards, because if your people within your business are inspired and motivated, are really believing in what they do on a day-to-day basis, then they can give that great customer service that no doubt all customers do want to receive. So yeah, that's kind of where my thinking is at this minute in time. Just that perhaps some of what is talked about at this moment in time in terms of culture, in terms of purpose, is very well intentioned, but misses the mark a little bit. And it isn't necessarily seen through, and it doesn't always deliver. It doesn't always connect. Perhaps there are big gaps and cracks and that sort of thing in organizations at this moment in time. So I think that's a big deal. And I think in this world that we talk about today, where there's multi-generations in the workplace and so much is changing all of the time, having this sense of culture, of unity, of connection within an organization is tremendously important, because it's the kind of thing that breeds resilience. And again, another thing of great importance in these changing times.
Absolutely, and I think what you sort of alluded to there is, I'm sure something that rings true in a lot of places is the company that plasters its values on the wall and then forgets about them, and sort of, oh, look at us, we're so we must be honest, and acting with integrity, and all of the sort of words that tend to come out, and we know this because it's written on the wall, and sort of I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, plenty of companies where this is just, there's this disconnect, isn't there? And so
Absolutely.
this provides, even more of an issue than not having things written up at all, right? Like if you're going into work asking what your purpose is, and you want to sit there and say the company that I work with is an honest, company that's trying to do the right thing and acts with integrity, etc. But you don't believe that, then that creates a cognitive dissonance, which is even more damaging than not having those things in the first place.
Absolutely, it's that word in authenticity again, isn't it? It's tremendously important, and some of us really live by it, and some of us don't. And we seem to be in strange times at the moment, whereby a lot of the leadership in the world is a bit lacking, and therefore role models are not aren't readily available, and maybe lots of the things that populations used to hang on in the past have diminished in their importance, different things in different parts of the world. But I think business and entrepreneurialism and all of that, there's been a strong movement in this direction, probably since about the 1980s, I think, which was probably a time when jobs and such like changed, and therefore people properly engaged with businesses a little bit. And for it to have longevity and for it to have real meaning, it does need this sense of purpose, because there is a demand now for people to feel fulfilled in those roles. Because everything that I'm hearing about is that the younger generations do not behave in the way that the rest of us do. And obviously, I'm a generation or two ahead of you, but notwithstanding that, I see it with my kids, and they're not motivated by many of the things that their grandparents might expect. So it's really important to find the things that matter to them, given the preponderance of them in the workplace going forward, and the importance of their contributions. And the fact that, those are the guys that understand the digital world that some of us are just tourists in. So I think there's so much change that's going to happen, and the rate of change is increasing so much that businesses are going to have to be incredibly agile, and that won't come from doing things the way that they used to do it. So I think culture becomes ever more important, because having people who are committed to the cause and understand why something is happening, why the business exists, what the business is there for, what the motives and the real drivers for the business are, and what works well for the business, as well as for the customers, as well as for the planet. These things become ever more important, I think, in this day and age, because management's far too busy to answer all the questions, and maybe they're unable to answer all of the questions. So, there's a great deal of resource that exists in the body of employees if they're motivated, if they're engaged. Obviously, engagement being one of the things closest to your heart, employee
I
engagement.
talk about it far too much, don't I? It's almost like I might even have a podcast on it one day. Who knows?
But I think it's profoundly important, just as you do.
I agree.
And so there must be so much underutilized resource in workplaces by virtue of the fact that people aren't engaged. And especially with all the other issues that we got in the workplace today, whether people should be in the office, whether they should be at home, hybrid, whatever, how to know what people are really doing is incredibly difficult. And so unless you're putting in place situations whereby that the people who you employ want to work within your business, then you're potentially wasting a lot of time and a lot of money.
Absolutely, and something you said there, of course, about the younger generation coming through reminds me of a couple of podcasts ago when I spoke to Amy Mencarelli, and she pointed out that this is the year when Gen Z are going to overtake baby boomers in the workforce. So this change is, as you mentioned, it's just inevitable. It's coming down the road, and you can't stop it. It's just bigger than any one of us, and so we do need to be looking in the right place for that. one of the things I often talk about when people often ask sort of what engagement means to me, what is it that I'm going to talk about, and so I go through a little thought experiment, and maybe you join me with it. Imagine a job that you really hated, that you really didn't like, that just wanted to get to the end of the day of, literally just counting down the time you get to go home to your life and not have to think about the job anymore. We've all got one.
Yep.
And imagine a day that you really, really just weren't having it, and think of how resourceful you were that day, how much effort you put in, how helpful you were to your colleagues or customers that you were dealing with, how ready you were to solve problems that were bigger than the thing just in front of you, rather than just sort of getting on with the work, actually going and fixing the big problems that companies face. And then when, of course, when someone comes in and says, "Oh, we're going to go and do this thing differently," how open were you to that? See if you can sort of think of those sorts of feelings that day. And now take another job, take a job that you loved on a day that you thought, God, this is amazing. This is what I live for. This is a great
Yeah.
day. I feel brilliant. And think of those exact same things. How
Yeah.
well you dealt with colleagues and customers. How innovative you were, how productive you were. Et cetera. And certainly in my case, and everyone that I've done this with, the difference between those two things is stark. It's a massive difference in attitude, and yet it's the same person.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference between a disengaged and an engaged employee. You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
need to, we talk of getting the best talent. Of course, we want the best talent, but actually the bigger sort of differential that we have a control over is how disengaged or how engaged, people are. How
Yeah.
much the people in your company give a crap,
Yes.
for want of a better word.
And a lot of that comes down to how you manage the work within that business again, and getting the right people matched with the right roles. So again, it comes back to this idea of fulfillment. So you've got to be really clear about what a role is about and perhaps define it in a relatively tight way, and then recruit the person who's able to do that role and who's willing to do that role and who is motivated to do that role. And in that situation, you can get good outcomes, because there are so many jobs that we have to give people within businesses that we would not wish to do ourselves and that would not motivate us for a moment. But when you get someone who is motivated because they can see the purpose in that role and they can see why they can do a good job in that situation, that gives them fulfillment, that motivates them, that inspires them. They do a great job. It's so often when we're confronting jobs that we're not, tasks that we're not so keen on doing, that we end up with negative outcomes. And again, I think this has got to point to the future, and ideas around job sharing and more flexible working further down the line. The idea of a 40, 50, 60-hour week, whatever it might be, 9 to 5, is I think becoming a little bit outdated already. And I think there needs to be more flexibility. Perhaps there's job sharing. AI is obviously going to become a big impact. It's going to change, and it is going to remove certain jobs from workplaces. Of course it is. But at the same time, yes, I agree, there will be other roles that will be created that I've yet to imagine, and I'm sure even you have yet to imagine, Fraser. But new roles will come about.
Of
But we're
course.
always going to have to find people and find a way to match people well to the role. So we need to be really explicit about what the role is, and then we've got to match the right people with that and make sure that they remain motivated to do a good job in that role. And if they say, well, actually, I've been doing this job for 2 years now, I'd really like to try something different, then that's a pretty reasonable thing for them to do. And that's probably something that we should be anticipating and expecting. And we need to expect somebody else to need to take that role, and hopefully something else that we can find this person to do, because presumably they've grown during that period of time and developed as well. So I absolutely agree with you. It is about the motivation, but a lot of it, I think, has to come back to the business's efforts to motivate those people to do the right things. And I think, therefore, a lot comes back to the employer. So having real clarity around what somebody's role is, what those responsibilities are, what good performance looks like, getting real feedback, all this sort of stuff, I think, is tremendously important in creating motivation.
Absolutely. I mean, the power of simply being heard is vast in and of itself, isn't it?
Oh,
Feeling that you are listened to and what you say matters. That alone accounts for an awful lot of
absolutely. We all
goodwill.
want to feel valued, don't we? And again, as I've just suggested, if you're doing a job that somebody tells you you're doing a good job with and you're getting great feedback about it, it's going to make you feel good about yourself. You're going to feel
Absolutely.
fulfillment. You're going to be happy to go to work the next day and do some more of the same, perhaps. So it's about being valued. And again, yeah, probably another one of the problems that exists in the workplace today is about how to manage people, especially in the world now, whereby remote working and we've become all a little bit more detached than used to be in years gone by. So I think that's obviously a big challenge for managers, let alone the multi-generational stuff as well that we talk about these days.
Absolutely, and I mean, what I'm about to say is, must be prefaced by saying this. This is difficult to do, but I think there's a mindset shift. There's a sort of shift happening with people's attitude towards work, which requires equally a mindset shift from companies and businesses, where we don't, previously the 9 to 5 was created, by Henry Ford, in order to get, basically to get people to do the same manual labor for as long as was ethically right.
Yeah, yeah,
Really is kind of what it came down to. But the world of work and the way that we operate is not that way. I've gone back a number of times here that in the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, you had armies of accounts clerks in large companies, stamping invoices,
we
and,
did.
and that was a manual job. But now we have Zero or Save, and so that role has changed. We don't have less accountants. We don't have an army of accounts clerks who are looking for jobs. Um, but that role has changed. And what we need to be looking at here is more of the relationship changes from a bum in a seat, or a robot that comes to work at 9 and leaves at 5, into almost like a kind of contractor agreement with our own staff. And what I mean by that is that we start looking at problems that need solutions. And so we say, we've got, in that example, we've got loads of invoices that are coming in, and we need to make sure that they're all genuine and right, and we need to make sure they get paid on time.
Yeah,
Therefore, we need someone to come in and fix this for us. And we call that person the head of finance or purchasing department, or whatever that's going to be.
yeah,
Um, but then we start creating this kind of problem statement. From a problem statement that we can then create output and outcomes that we want to focus on, to say, okay, if our invoices are paid on time, and there's no errors, and all of that, then we consider that good. Then
yeah.
we can start having a real adult to adult conversation with people, rather than going, why weren't you here at 9 o'clock this morning? Oh, I'm really sorry, sir, my bus was delayed. As we used to, I've seen someone be screamed at for being late to work because the bus system failed. And it's sort of not really their fault. Instead, you turn around and you say, are our invoices being paid on time? Yes, cool. Keep it up then. That's great.
Absolutely.
And could we do it better? That change in and of itself is powerful.
Absolutely. And I think there just needs to be a revisit of how we work and what the processes are and the mentality that's put into it. So the kind of thing that you're describing there, and measuring by outcomes rather than necessarily measuring the inputs, is absolutely correct. It's definitely something that needs to happen. And I think we see it in other ways as well, whereby the expectations that are set for people, even at the highest level, can be completely the wrong ones. So I have a bit of a bugbear with short-term thinking. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's far too much short-term thinking that happens in business because, of course, the compensation of those people right at the top of the organization is determined by short-term results. And that's just madness for me, because it leads to the worst possible behavior. It doesn't relate their performance really with, okay, some of them will tell me it does, I'm sure, but it doesn't necessarily relate actual performance with actual outcomes. Um, and therefore it leads to the wrong behavior in many, many instances. And that's just one example of such things. There'll be a litany of those examples throughout organizations. And invariably, when they put those kind of reward mechanisms in place at the top of an organization, they also cascade down and throughout the organization because there's a belief that that's the right thing to do. And that creates the culture within the organization, irrespective of whatever the core values are or whatever the purpose of the business is or whatever the mission statement is and that whatever people want the culture to be, the culture becomes one that centers around reward and self-serving outcomes. And
Mhm.
that can never lead to the best answers, the best outcomes. So, yeah, we've got to look at how these organizations actually function to deliver the outcomes that we want. And we've got to think mindfully about where we're going. But maybe that comes back to another one of the critiques that we made a moment ago. And hopefully we'll look for some solutions in a minute. But this idea of a lack of vision and a lack of leadership, which certainly exists in certain parts of society at this moment in time, I think some of the best brains in our world at this moment in time are operating in business. And so we need more guidance and more expertise coming through from some of those guys. And, many of them do chip in and they've got lots of thoughts on these things. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that we hand the world over to Jeff and Elon and all the rest of it. But at the
Yes,
same
that'd be
time,
worrying.
we have got to look at new ways of doing things. And especially as we move into this world of automation, where so much power is potentially going to be handed over, and we've become a bunch of people who don't always engage our brains. We've all got examples of these stories where people go off track by following a GPS, for example, because they've forgotten how to navigate a car or read a map or think about where they're going. They just blindly follow the instructions that the computer's giving them. Well, we're going to have computers telling us to do many more things in the future, and blindly following those instructions is going to be pretty dangerous and pretty hazardous for us all, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think I've just thought of quite a good analogy within that because I think it's probably the case that those who learnt to read a map, even if they now got GPS, they didn't necessarily forget how to read the map. They didn't, forget how to navigate the area that they were in. They simply chose not to bother in
Yep.
favor of a tool that they put some trust in. And this is, somewhat analogous, I think, to what we were saying about engaged and disengaged people in the workplace. That disengaged people will blindly follow the path of least resistance
Yes.
because that is easy. Whereas people who are engaged will look for better ways to solve those things. And I just wonder whether that's a sort of analogy for what we're talking about. I think it's a good time to to sum up. I think what we've been talking about there, the purpose really I think is the sort of defining word for what we're talking about. We've explored that, of course, from a number of different angles, from sort of management structures through to senior leadership goals, through to ways to measure things, and of course having a real belief in core values. And I think all of those form a really quite a good pillar as to where we need to go because I've harped on many a time and I know you've been to a couple of my talks about the fact that the world is going to change and you've got to keep up, otherwise it's going to be over there by the time
Yeah.
you've even thought about it. And so we need this change, and it's more than an individual. It's more than just strong leaders saying we're going to go do that thing now. Because as the old saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Absolutely. And it's exactly that. We are going to have to get up earlier, run faster, all of those things, because without question, the world is moving faster than it ever has done. I think I've heard you quote about that and slower than it ever will do. Um,
That's Justin Trudeau. Yeah, it's a
yeah.
great quote. Let me see if I can remember it exactly. It's the world has never moved this fast, and yet it will never move this slow again.
Well, it's something to think about, isn't it? And I think that's exactly it. Yeah, we've all got to think a little bit more sometimes and engage. I think engagement is about thinking, isn't it? It's about being present and being conscious of what you're doing and the reasons for it and being mindful about those things. So I think it's all important stuff. And yes, it comes back down to that purpose. So yeah, fully agree.
That's it. And I mean, at the risk of pushing back the second question, I think are you aware of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow and his sort of musings on or not more than musings really on System One and System Two thinking?
Yes, I've
System,
heard,
I
I've,
think
I,
this is powerful in this area.
it is, yeah, absolutely. And those different ways of thinking. And I often think as well about, I mean, he talks about it in a different way, but Dr. Excuse me, Peters, the sports psychologist as well, who's very much the chimp paradox guy.
Yes.
Again, just thinking about what's going on and being aware of what's happening and being mindful of the
Mhm.
things that you can control and those things that you can't. And so to be conscious that you can only ever put in your best performance and give your best, I think is a really important thing for people to understand and believe, because obviously lots of outcomes don't turn out the way that we want them to. And those outcomes, when they're not the ones that we wanted them to be, might be described as failures. And well, is failure always a bad thing? On one level, you might say that it absolutely is. But at the same time, if it's a learning process and we come back better and stronger, then it's not necessarily the end of, it's not a bad thing necessarily. So, yeah, it's funny how people getting inside people's heads and getting them to think the right things, motivating people is really important, and keeping people's mentality strong and resilient.
Absolutely. I think that's a really really powerful sort of message there. It, let's jump straight
Go
into this
on.
second question then. So imagine that we could fix all of this. We
Yeah.
can give people purpose. We can get people really really fired up.
Yeah.
What world should we look forward to? What are the problems that we have now that would go, and what would that look like?
Yeah, well, I'm going to get into it slightly obliquely, but I'm sure you'll tease everything out that's in my brain. But one of my favorite quotes is by the young, or well, it wasn't a young John Lennon at the time of the quote, but it references that story of his mother telling him that happiness was the key to life. So when he
Mhm.
went to school and the teachers put a challenge in front of him, asked the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up, John? He said he wanted to be happy. And they said that he hadn't understood the question. And obviously his answer was, well, I don't think you understand life. Because surely being happy is actually what we all want. And so
Mhm.
if we were looking to a better world, I think a greater degree of happiness, a greater sense of fulfillment that we alluded to earlier on, coming through from purpose, a place, yeah, where we all felt a greater sense of contentment. I mean, happy, we won't delve too deep into trying to define happiness necessarily, but a sense of contentment, a sense of gratitude for the life that you have, all of those sorts of things, I think would be really important. And I think they can be enhanced in a world where people believe in what the business that they work for does for the world. I think if you believe that your business does good things for the world, you can be contented and happy and take fulfillment from that. And that has to apply to the majority, or hopefully everybody within the organization, not just a few. So I think getting the world to a place whereby there was a greater degree of contentment because businesses were doing good things for the world generally. Not to say they shouldn't be growing, not to say that they shouldn't be making money. It's not necessarily a zero sum game. But at the same time, it needs to be win win scenarios. And I think business can be a great force for good, as I've already alluded to. I think there's some brilliant minds that work within the world of business that set examples, that lead us forward, that are continuously challenging humanity and trying to help us progress, make progress, go into the future. So that would be a great place, wouldn't it? If business was the kind of force for good that we know it can be, where sometimes some of it feels a little bit like just marketing for the sake of marketing. I mean, God forbid, just consumerism for the sake, mindless consumerism, perhaps. I don't think that's the best world. I don't think that's the best example of the world that we've got. So I think if we can find a place whereby, yeah, we're solving the world's biggest problems and making the world a better place, and we've got a higher level of contentment. So that actually would impel me, therefore, to find a way to measure that contentment. And I don't know how we do that. You've obviously challenged yourself with some of that, and we need certain measures around that, don't we? Around what objectively and subjectively is happiness in our world. It should be more than just the next shiny object and a bigger paycheck, perhaps. I think it should be more than that. We should celebrate that it comes from other aspects of life. And I think also business and work has got a big place to play in the world that we were perhaps talking about a little bit earlier on, where some of the structures, particularly in our part of the world, have changed and they're different to what they might once have been. You know, God, I'll get into trouble in a minute if I use the R word for religion and all that sort of stuff. But we are spiritual beings as well. I think I'm not really a religious person, but I am. You know, I believe in more than just me, so to speak. You know, there's lots of things that I don't believe in. I'm pretty scientifically based and all the rest of it, but nonetheless, I think that we want to feel that we're part of, we belong, that we belong, and I think that yeah, to an extent, that's what I think spirituality is. It's that sense of belonging when there's a degree of community, when there's society, and all those sorts of things. So I think there's great challenges for us to address, but I think at the moment, business could play a greater part in bringing us together and guiding people to the right
Yeah, I
answer.
agree. I mean, we constantly see, don't we, that business is the ultimately driving force of a sort of modern economy, really.
Absolutely.
And so everything that we've got going on comes back to a business at some point. And you're right that businesses that have real purpose, often do better, get more sales, grow quicker, etc., etc. So there's clear like business advantages, but I think you're right. This is about something bigger, and it reminds me of in Mo Gaudat's book Solve for Happy, which is, in my
Yeah.
opinion, an absolute must read.
Yeah.
He points out that for the most part we've evolved into a sort of belief system that if we work hard and we become successful, then we will be happy,
Yeah.
and that's the order. But
Yes.
one of the things that he says in that book that really struck me is that he's met a lot of people who are at the top of their game,
Yeah.
incredibly good at the things that they do. He said they all have one thing in common, which is that they love what they do.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and really, I think if you don't love what you do, you're never going to be top of it. It's impossible. You need to love it. You need to be obsessed by it. You need to get your fulfillment from it, and that comes somewhat internally. It's also external in the sort of course of businesses. So he flips on his head, and this goes back to that John Lennon quote saying, what you've got to do instead is go and find happiness,
Yeah.
and off the back of that, you will find success. And
Yeah.
I have had to clarify this. I gave a talk on this, and someone asked me, "Yeah, but there's lots of things you can do that make you happy that won't make you successful or do anything." Yeah, okay, that's so. Adding a little bit extra, we need to find sort of happiness in the pursuit of success, and so we need to find the things that are in a modern world sort of commercial that make us happy, as opposed to going for endless walks with your dog is great and may make you very happy. It's probably not going to make you very much money though. Or and maybe that's not the metric you're going for, but whatever it is.
No, but perhaps just finding that happiness, and maybe that's another component of the way that businesses evolve in the future. I mean, I have no desire to retire ever. I intend to keep working endlessly, but as long as my body will have it happen, my body and brain. But at the same time, maybe some people would like to retire early and go and have a life on a golf course, or go and or go on cruises for the rest of their life. And if that's what makes them happy and they've earned their bit of money doing that, then maybe they don't need to continue being that, whatever it was, that hard driving business person that they might have been, or whomever it was previously. So I think there are different phases in life. And I think a big part of our lives is spent working. So we have got to feel fulfilled about that. And we have got to enjoy that. But we should also recognize that, yeah, this idea of work-life balance, it doesn't just happen on a day-to-day basis, on a month-by-month basis, or anything else. It's over the long run, isn't it, really? And it's over that period of time that we felt we did something meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
We hopefully tried to make a contribution, and try and make the world a little bit of a better place. And I think it's that idea of making the world a better place, which is the one that would really work well from my own point of view. I think that's really important. I read far too much stuff about climate change and that sort of thing, and obviously that can put you in in a less than positive frame of mind, because I think there are unpleasant things that are going to come to pass in the next years as a consequence of some of what we've done. Now, that
Hmm.
doesn't change the fact that I also believe that we can find ways to solve the problems over the long run too, and we can indeed make the world a better place. But we might have to put up with the fact that it might get worse in certain regards for a period of time. Um, but making the world a better place and feeling like we're doing the right things by humanity and having a greater sense of belonging and society, I think would be really beneficial.
Absolutely. One of the questions I often get asked whenever I sort of talk about this sort of thing, I go back a minute to to Cambridge Audio, and I remember very clearly on your your website it states this is a company for music lovers.
Yes.
We want our customers, their music lovers, our staff, their music lovers. I
Yeah.
remember I don't know whether it's still up, but you had the team page, and on it it was like the person's name and then their favorite song, like as
Yeah.
almost as though that's the most powerful and important thing about it. And I think in those sorts of areas, you found purpose. There are places where purpose is very very obvious. If you're a charity helping
Yes.
disadvantaged people, your purpose is very very easy to sort of find and nail down. In places where you're providing consumer goods, it's harder, but there's still an element of you're providing this experience for people who love stuff. But not all businesses are sort of quote unquote sexy. And I wonder whether you have anything that can sort of guide people who might be looking for a purpose, but that they don't immediately have that ability. Let's say they sell um, plumbing supplies. There's a
Plumbing
challenge.
supplies.
Plumbing supplies. How can a plumbing supplies company find their purpose?
Well, I'm sure that Mr. Pimlico Plumbers thinks he's got a pretty sexy business, and he's certainly motivated the people that work for him. I've met one or two of them down the years, and they're very proud of that business. And I think, therefore, he's obviously created a culture within that business, and they're serving people, aren't they? So that there's
Mhm.
obviously people that have a need when their plumbing goes wrong, or when they want a new kitchen or bathroom, perhaps. I don't know exactly everything that the business does. But if you're a plumbing supplies business, then you're obviously serving a purpose. And so being able to do that in the right way, being able to satisfy your customers is obviously the thing that's of greatest importance. If you were say you were a refuse disposal company, now
Mhm.
I would say that was pretty unglamorous kind of activity.
Mhm.
You can imagine that you're not going to be turning up looking to, if how you appear is important to you, that's going to represent an amount of a problem.
Mhm.
But clearly, our world generates an amount of rubbish. I think it would be very good, actually, if we didn't have the need for such positions, for such roles, but we do create a huge amount of waste. And therefore, being able to deal with that, take that problem off people's hands, and then hopefully process it in the correct fashion, I think that would be something to be proud of. And I think that, if that was my business, that would be something that I would choose to celebrate. And I'd get all of the people motivated around that cause because we're serving an important purpose in our society. So I do think that most businesses have that real importance within our society. I think there are some that have less so. Um, um, I wouldn't want to always name names and poke fingers, but I think there are certain roles that don't always add a lot, and perhaps they take more than they give. Perhaps some of the extremes in the financial world. Again, I'm not necessarily 100% clear of each and every business that happens there, and quite often it can be a dark art. But maybe they get disproportionate returns for what they do, and maybe there are other places too. So I appreciate that, but I'm not suggesting that if people are adding, if people are contributing, and you can see that they're doing something that is beyond merely their own benefit, then I think that's something that we can all get behind and all be proud of.
I think so, and I think that's really really interesting. That I think any business can find that purpose, and that purpose is can be derived from a number of places. Finding people in need who've got burst plumbing and are trying to, I don't know, raise kids or work from home or something. You need to
Yeah.
get supplies to them. Or, as you say, being able to take waste and be responsible with it and do the right thing with it. Maybe turn it into power generation or recycling or whatever it is that you need. Like the purpose is out there if we go and search for it. And I think that's true on a business level. It's also true on an individual level. Really
Completely.
to kind of go full circle back to where we are. It's been a really fascinating conversation, I think. I'm aware of time. We may take the record for the longest episode at this point.
So
But
good.
it's been a really, really interesting conversation about purpose and about that sort of meaning that we need to derive. And I think it's right to say that this is something individuals need to search for. Happiness is the word that you used after the second question, and I think it is incumbent on individuals to go and find things that make them happy. I think you're totally right. Consumerism is not the answer. Too little of something, too little resource, that definitely is a problem that needs to be solved. After that point, generally adding more doesn't necessarily increase happiness. It's more inherent. And companies need to be aware of this journey, and they need to be supporting people, understanding people, and pushing them on their own journey towards the happiness and the fulfillment that they want in life, because that is in turn what gives you loyalty. Back to that second example, the day that you felt great, that you're innovative, that you work with people well, that you look after customers, that you find solutions to problems. Like those are the things that we need to do in the world. Full stop.
Yes,
We can start off by
absolutely.
doing it at work.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure to have you, Stuart.
No, thank you very much indeed, Fraser. It's been a joy talking to you. Fascinating as ever. And thank you very much.
No, absolutely my pleasure. Appreciate it, Stuart. Thank you so much.
Cheers.